We're seeing dramatic swings in weather and climate, and yet we have a significant portion of, I would characterize, you don't have to, maybe some uninformed or lesser informed people that have some power that are saying, no, we shouldn't worry about it, not do anything about it. And it kind of goes to the whole theme of what we're talking about today. We're talking about recognizing our natural resources, appreciating our natural resources, learning about our natural resources, and then trying to protect them. And that's going to be the theme of what we're doing today. I have a set of slides up here that we're going to get to, and it's going to chronicle some of the things about the Loess Hills. As Rex said, I grew up in Sloan, which is the Missouri River Valley. From my standpoint, geomorphologically, I consider the Missouri River Valley to be part of the Loess Hills because one would not exist without the other. And also I can remember very fondly one picnic that I went on with a classmate of Rex and mine's named Mary Badami, Mary Persinger, and Rex and we went up on Dura Hill, just east of Whiting. And we didn't realize what we were doing, but we knew we had an appreciation for the hills. And we climbed up with a picnic basket and sat on the front range down there in Winona County with the wonderful, wonderful views that we have across the valley. And I recognize now, looking back, as Rex said before, kindred spirits. We had a true appreciation for the hills and have just gone throughout all our lives learning more and more. Every day you can learn more about it. So hopefully we're doing that today. You having fun back there? Yeah, well, there you go. I'll tell you a little bit about how I got involved here. I've worked with natural resources one way or another. For a long time, I was an educator at Iowa State University in pesticide safety. The idea was people who are going to be using these things on the 2/3 of the state that's covered with corn and soybeans and some other crops, that they should do it as safely as they can and follow EPA guidelines. And so I would work on developing training materials that would go out to train farmers. I would do video conferences. We did videos that many people got sick of seeing across the state in co-ops and places like that. So with that, always my take to it was, this is fun. Normally this happens at home, and I use words that I can't use here.
You can use them here. You're pretty liberal.
I know you're pretty liberal, but we're gonna be careful here. Anyway, with that, working with farmers and that, I did gain an appreciation of something I already knew, and that is we've got a group of people out here that really do care. And we've got an awful lot of farmers that really care. We've got an awful lot of people that work in agriculture that really care. You have some others that have other interests, namely dollars and cents. And I remember an early conversation we had about sustainable farming. And you know what one of the first measures to be successfully be a sustainable farmer is? You have to be successful and sustainable economically. And that's sometimes something that a lot of people will miss, but you have to be able to turn a profit. And so there are some reasons why people do things, and we need to appreciate from both sides. If only in the world we could have, if only in Washington and only in Des Moines, we could have people that would appreciate the other side a little bit better. I think that's a cry that we all have out. Am I stalling really well?
Yeah, you're good. Keep going.
Yeah, that's good. Okay, when I retired, I finished my career working in Harrison County Extension. That's Logan, Iowa, about, well, it was 56 miles from Sloan, so it would be about 75 miles from here, 80 miles from here. And it's a largely rural county, wonderful people, I would characterize it as very conservative area. But we got along great and had good communication with people and had people trying to do good things. As I went through that, I got involved and stayed involved with the Loess Hills. When I retired, I got appointed by the Woodbury County Board of Supervisors, since I live in Woodbury County, and we'll talk about that process. But I got appointed by the Board of Supervisors to be a board member of the Loess Hills Alliance. After 3 years, somehow I sillily said yes one day, and I agreed to stand for election to be the chair of the executive committee. That was a year ago. And we're going through some hard times right now. I know I have friends in Extension still. They send me pleas out, to go talk to legislators to help support the university, and I fully support that. But we have our own battles that we're fighting right now that I'll talk about. And there are many people within the environmental community right now that are frustrated and fighting battles because there is a shortfall of state funds. For all that somebody in Washington says about how great and how huge the economy is, we seem to have a problem in Iowa right now. And that problem is going to filter down to a lot of different things that are near and dear to all of us here. So I say that just to set the political climate where we are. It says 67% complete. It's getting there, it's getting there. 100, yay. Yeah, and then it'll shut down and then it'll start up. Yeah, that's all right. How many of you were here, I can't remember when it was, last summer when I spoke to the Sierra Club? If I can see your hands. Yeah, a few of you. The slides I have here, a lot of them are going to be the same. The message may be tweaked a little bit here, but I've got some other things in here because the focus is going to be a little different. Can you get it back? I will tell you, upon retirement, you get a lot busier than what you ever thought you would be in most cases. I mentioned that before about not being able to say no. I am currently the zoning commissioner for the city of Sloan. All that means is when there's a variance or something, I have to sign a piece of paper. I'm also on the cemetery board, which for the most part is very quiet. I mean, the people don't complain much. Makes it work well. But when something goes wrong, there's usually somebody around to be upset. So
you did choose your file.
Oh, he needs me. Here, talk to him.
I did want to give a thank you to Carter for filling in for me as lay leader. He's such a pro at that anyway.
Yes, he is. I think we'll.
I had nothing to do with the technology, just a disclosure.
He wasn't blaming you, Carter. That's all right. I'll take that.
Does this advance the slides?
Yeah, it should.
Okay.
Oh, I don't know
We'll
if you
try
guys
it.
know.
Well, now the presentation. Hello. Loess Hills of Iowa, and this is many of the slides in here. I want to give a shout out to someone from Sioux City, actually, that many of you probably know, a woman named Diane Blankenship. Okay, and Diane has worked with us in gathering some of these slides, and she actually has quite a lengthy slide set together, and she's allowed us graciously to pick and choose. Some of these were things that people graciously allowed her to pick and choose from. So as we go through here, most of the old historic slides are going to be in reference to her. If I can make this work. Oh. Rex, can you do that? Thank you. See, he's handy. Okay, first we're going to talk about what is Loess, and how many of you have been around, you've lived in this area out here. No, how many of you know what Loess is? For those of you who don't, I have a little bag, and we'll pass it around, and then just stick your finger in there and feel it a little bit here to get a feel for what this is. This is a very special soil material. This is not the only place in the world where loess occurs. In fact, loess occurs all over the world. What makes ours special? We just collected a whole heck of a lot of it, more than anybody else, and so it actually formed a landform that we have. So first of all, to pronounce it, the name is Loess. It rhymes with bus. It's a German word. I have heard so many different pronunciations for this word. If you call it Loess, I always used to say, my mother's name was Loess, and she did not appreciate being called silty. Okay? So it is Loess. It is deposited from the wind. It is an aeolian material, meaning deposited by wind. It's very uniform silt-sized particles, and that's as this is passing around, if you're feeling it. It has very, very uniform small particles, silt-sized particles. Now, when it collects up in these big banks like we have, it's very structurally stable from an engineering standpoint. You can build on it, you can do all sorts of things. It's great, except it becomes extremely erodible and subject to slumping when it becomes saturated with water. Have we ever heard of anything like that happening in Sioux City? Slumps? Remember a few years ago, it's been a while now, but War Eagle Monument used to be kind of sitting out a little farther. And one day, the hillside wound up blocking off Interstate 29 up there. That's a case where the material destabilized and went down the hill. There's a famous story down just north of Council Bluffs, which is part of the same landform, where some people built this very, very nice home, and it was about 40 years ago. At the time, the house was worth about $500,000, which nowadays money would be huge. And they had a swimming pool out there. Well, that's great. Everything's fine and dandy. They had a great view of the valley. Until somehow the swimming pool one year developed a leak in the bottom of it. Now you've got a vessel of water that is providing water to saturate this loess underneath it. And one morning they're having their coffee and they felt a rumble. And they looked outside and the swimming pool was 50 feet down the slope. The sad thing about it was, it took part of the foundation of the house with it.
Ooh.
Okay, instantly this $500,000 home dropped in value pretty dramatically. And a lot of it was because the people who engineered the site didn't prepare for this special material we call loess. There was a civil engineer at Iowa State named Dr. Handy who used to come out here and do extensive studies and work with people in Council Bluffs and Sioux City predominantly to deal with issues like this, because most engineers think the whole world works the same way, except out here there are some differences, so I just mentioned that. And the last thing is the Loess Hills region that we talk about, where all this glut of dust got dumped, is 5 to 15 miles wide, and in places it's 200 feet thick. There's a site out here, Bacon Creek, just east of Sioux City, that the loess has been measured at, I think it's 210 feet thick. That's pretty amazing, really. Okay, here's just a quick map if you look at it. These are aeolian deposits, that would be wind deposits that have some significance. The black areas are aeolian sands. Notice the big clot out there, Cherry County, Nebraska is the center of it. What's that called?
Sand hills.
It's the Sand Hills of Nebraska. It's the largest dune sand region in North America. The lighter colored gray is areas of major loess deposition. And you see, we're not alone. We've got a lot of other areas around, but we have some rather unique geography here that allowed for the loess to pile up on the east side and a little bit on the west side of the Missouri River. So if you notice here, we've got two lobes of glacial activity coming down. One in South Dakota says JL, that stands for the James Lobe of the Wisconsin Glacier. The DML is the Des Moines Lobe of the Wisconsin Glacier, so it's two kind of contemporaneous lobes that stuck down. Between those two, what do you have? You've got an area where there would be drainage off the ice front. And also, as this ice mass is melting to the north, it's giving off great gluts of water during the summer when it's warmer. With those great gluts of water, it's picking up all these sediments that the glaciers had stored and sending them down. If you look at a map, and I should have a map of the Missouri River here, but I don't. Think about it. When the Missouri River comes down, Nebraska, South Dakota, and it hits the Big Sioux River, what happens just south of where the confluence of the Big Sioux River is? The river makes, well, it's just right about in there. The river makes a big bend. So when we talk about South Sioux City, it is actually south of Sioux City. Even though the Missouri River, you think, just goes north-south, pretty much. So this big bend slows down the water, changes the dynamics of the water. We also had a big, broad floodplain that developed south of Sioux City. In that big, broad floodplain, all of a sudden, in wet years, in wet times of the year, when the water was flowing high, the water filled that valley. When it filled the valley, it spread out several miles. And when it spreads out, it slows down. What happens to anything that's carrying material? When it slows down, it loses energy. It can't carry along the stuff. So each year, we were just basically throwing more and more sediments out here in this valley. The wintertime, the water levels would drop. You had all this bare ground, this bare sediment out there. Constantly we had, for the most part, we had a predominant wind from the west that picked up and sorted out sediments and sorted out the silt and put it on the east side, predominantly the east side of the valley. And that's how we built up our Loess Hills. Okay, Rex. So silt is floury and smooth in consistency, as you can feel that. If we wet it down, it would not feel sticky. It would be very smooth. That's one of the things we do if we have a class out in the field. You know, we have them actually with water. We feel clay, we feel silt, we feel sand. So the texture we have people describe, an adjective to describe silt textured material is floury. It is not sticky. Okay. So what are the Loess Hills? It's a landform that's unique in North America to Iowa and a little bit into Missouri. We have to give Atchison County, Missouri a little bit of credit because they have just a little tag end of it down there. But on the western front of Iowa, it is a unique landform to the United States. It has a drier climate than the surrounding area because it typically has very steep slopes. Limited to 7 Iowa and 1 Missouri county. It's home to the largest remaining native prairie tracts in Iowa. I should have said in Iowa there, but we have the largest contiguous prairie tracts out here in the Loess Hills. That's something that when you live here, you don't often think about. Because we live here, we take things for granted, and that's kind of what was in a couple of the readings today. And it fits here. You really have to look at it. Even me, I'm interested very strongly in this, and I take things for granted sometimes, and you have to stop and smell the roses, as the old saying used to be. Wild roses in this case. It's from 5 to 15 miles wide, I said that earlier, and they're fragile and dramatically erodible materials when they're destabilized, so we form gullies out here. There have been some federal actions. In 1936, Congress passed the Little Sioux Flood Protection Act, and it threw a whole lot of money into western Iowa, for one of the things, to help farmers put in terraces, to put in things to help slow down the loss of water off the land so we had reduced gullying. Famous picture down by Holly Springs, where Rex and I went to junior high school. From the late 1940s with a school bus that was going across a bridge that had washed out that morning, and so the old school bus was stuck down in the gully. So it's kind of a big deal. And for a picture here, we start up Plymouth County. We actually have the king and queen of the northern Loess Hills sitting here in the front here that live. Bill and Dottie live up there toward the north end in Plymouth County. It runs down, gets its thickest through Woodbury, Monona, and Harrison, and then it kind of squeezes down in Pottawatomie, Mills, and Fremont County. So pretty much, what's the best way to view the Loess Hills from north to south? People were very, very nice with the DOT because they put in a road just so we can look at the Loess Hills. And it's called Interstate 29. So you can see a lot of that. So that's the Loess Hills. Here is a characteristic landform feature. This is found many places other than here, well, some places other than here, but this is a predominant feature out here, this unique type of landscape slope. That's called cat stepping, cat steps. And you can see that right within the city limits of Sioux City. If you go up to Sioux City Prairie, if you go some of the other places around town, you can see this out on the Floyd Boulevard. You look on some of the roads out there. There's been a lot of debate about what just exactly caused that. Some people say, well, it was early megafauna, the elk and buffalo and all that would go out and make these cattle paths, that's that. There are other people that say it's because of the structural stability of the loess. It likes being uniform and it likes being linear up and down, and so it's little slopes, slumps, micro slumps on this hillside, and probably both of those are somewhat true. But cat steps are really kind of a pretty thing. Go ahead, Rex. Okay, what's that green blob?
An aquifer?
Well, you could say it looks kind of like the Ogallala Aquifer, although it's not quite complete all that way. That's a good guess. This is actually a landform region on a continental size. This is the largest savanna area in North America. This is called the Great Plains. Now, what's unique about Sioux City and the Great Plains, Sioux City and the Loess Hills? We're actually in the Great Plains. We are different from the rest of the state in that the Loess Hills and maybe just a couple counties into the state, that we are actually in the Great Plains landform unit. So along riparian areas, along the Missouri River, when European settlers first came here, we would have had thick riparian forest like cottonwoods. But when you got away from the river, what kind of trees did we have? In 1870, there's historical writings about the settlement of the township of Sloan, which is in southwestern Woodbury County. And that township, which is 36 square miles, they made a point to say there was not a stream, there was not a lake, there was not a body of water, and there were no trees in that whole section, in that whole township. Now think about that for a minute. And still we can see a little bit of that today, but all the trees that have come in here, unless they're riparian species, have been brought in. So when we look out here and we see these trees, some of the oaks up here a few of them may have been around, but not too many. Okay, right. Now Iowa, people talk about it as being a desert biologically. You've heard people say maybe that there's nothing here, it's a boring state and all that, and I would argue viciously against that. Because Iowa is kind of a unique state in that we have some different major biomes that come together in this state. In the northeast, the green, the Paleozoic Plateau, that's up where you get the caves and you get the Decorah eagles and all that. That is northern boreal forest comes into there. Iowa's only native population of balsam fir is up there in that area. So we have some species of plants and animals that are defining that area, northern boreal forest. We got the prairie pothole region on the Des Moines Globe. We've got the eastern hardwood forest coming into eastern Iowa, and out here, of course, we got the Great Plains and the Loess Hills. So we've got a lot of different things. And what does that mean, each of those different types? A different suite of plants and animals that inhabit it. So we've got great diversity across Iowa. We don't have ruffed grouse here, but if you want to see ruffed grouse in Iowa, you can go to northeast Iowa. Northeast Iowa doesn't have prairie rattlesnakes. But where can we find prairie rattlesnakes in Iowa? Yeah, about 10, 15 miles north of here. Very limited. Up by you guys. Pretty close. You don't have any, but pretty close. And they're not a threat. We'll go on. Okay, here's a plant that you find in the Loess Hills, but you don't find almost anywhere else in Iowa. Anybody know what that plant is? Talking to Blankenships, and they had some out in their prairie, but it's died out, I guess, is what she said. But you can find this out in Sioux City Prairie. It's one of my favorite plants. It's called Nine-Anther Dahlia. It is actually a legume, and it has pink flowers that are just gorgeous, but you have to stop and smell the roses. You have to stop and look, and those are little clusters of pink flowers there on a prairie landscape. Okay. We do have some things out here that are only found in western Iowa in the Loess Hills. The prairie rattlesnake up there I mentioned before. It's only about 80 or 90 acres that is the habitat where they are up there on broken kettle grasslands. And if you're worried about it, I was talking to one of the people that works for the Nature Conservancy up there and had been working for several years and had spent a lot of time out there on the bowl. And she said that in her 3 years she'd only seen one once. Now why is that? When you start walking out there, what's that rattlesnake doing? The last thing the rattlesnake wants to do is meet you. And so they get out of dodge. They get away. And so just feeling the vibrations of your feet and that stuff, they will get away. So if you give an arguably dangerous animal, but if you give that rattlesnake a chance to get away, it'll get away. Now that means you don't want to just step over logs and things without thinking about where you are. But it's something interesting. Has anyone ever seen the 10-petal menzelia? There are some in Sioux City, actually, over here. There used to be, and I think there still are, at Riverside, when you go up the hill there by the church, by the school, church school. There used to be a really nice one, and then the church decided to expand some stuff, and they took out part of the hill. But this plant does like disturbance, and so it's reestablished in a couple spots. There are a couple places in Harrison County that it's just gorgeous in the spring, in the summer rather. You go out there and they have the greatest smell. Flowers about yay big around. The Great Plains lubber grasshopper has not been reported since the 1950s, but it was reported in Woodbury and Monona counties in Iowa. And that's a great big huge, it's the largest of the grasshoppers we have. And the Rocky Mountain locust went extinct in 1902. But before it went extinct, when people first settled here, again in that reference that I was talking about, the history in Sloan, they talked about the locust swarms that would come in and it was horrible. What do you suppose drove the locusts extinct?
Birds.
Agriculture. We changed how things were done. We brought cattle in, we broke ground, we just made it unpalatable for them to live. We got rid of their habitat and they died out. So it is an extinct species. The interesting thing about that too is even though people fought them and all that, they didn't force them extinct. It was just kind of incidental to human activity that species went by. Okay, in the 1990s, the Loess Hills Alliance was established by the Iowa legislature, and it has an interesting mission statement, and it was to look at this landform that we have in western Iowa. The mission of the Loess Hills Alliance is to create a common vision for Iowa's Loess Hills, protecting special natural and cultural resources while ensuring economic viability, and the private property rights of the region. One of the things we deal with all the time is the private property rights. And there are people in this culture that we have that don't always get all the facts and just make assumptions and start talking. The Loess Hills Alliance, I've heard, is just going out there and they're trying to take all the land away from us. Well, by the Iowa Code, we can't, nor should we. Go ahead, Rex. Okay, so what were the Loess Hills like? What of our prairie heritage remains? And remember, I said before, we've got as much of the prairie heritage here as anywhere in Iowa, just so you know that. So it's worth remembering. Go ahead. Okay, 1862, there's a picture of Sioux City. Early prairie settlement. Sioux City was advantageously located where the Big Sioux River came down, and so we were able to gain access to the Dakotas here and that. But it looks just like most any other small town when you think about it. But what I want you to look at, think of Sioux City here. Look at the hillsides. What do you notice about the hillsides? Darn few trees. Darn few trees. Where are the trees?
On the river.
Okay, they're down there mostly associated with households, with where people brought them in, to plant for shade and all that stuff. It's understandable. I mean, but that's an adjustment to the environment. Go ahead, Eric. I put this one in here because, especially if there's kids in the audience, it's kind of one of those macabre things here. Guess who this guy is? He's famous in Sioux City. In 1895, I think it was, when they were looking to memorialize Sergeant Charles Floyd, a team of folks went in and they removed whatever remains were left of him into a box, and with the idea that he would be placed underneath a suitable memorial. And that happened. You all know where the memorial is, right? Anyway, this was a picture that was taken before it was put away in that box to put under the memorial. This is actually the skull of Sergeant Charles Floyd, the only person on the Lewis and Clark Corps of Discovery to die on the trip. And he chose the fortuitous place to die, Sioux City. Actually, he died on the Nebraska side, but that's okay. Okay. And there's Floyd's Bluff. And that picture would have been taken back right as they were building it, so it'd be about 1900. What do you notice about the hill? No trees. Okay. Go ahead. That's the Missouri River down here in the corner, too. Okay, it's interesting, and I found this is kind of great. Stan Buman, who's a guy from western Iowa, who's got a lot of interest in agriculture and that, went in and he found Bowemil Shimmick when he was doing his surveys, and he was one of the great, great naturalists of the turn of the century, the last century. And on November 21st, 1908, he wrote near the village of Grant Center, Iowa. And if you want to know where that is, it's where the Little Sioux River comes into the Missouri River Valley. So it's not too far from Sloan, actually. It's not too far from that place where Rex and I were talking about picnicking. But he took this picture on the left-hand side. Well, Stan went back and thought it would be interesting in 2006, almost a century later, to take a picture. What do you notice? Lots and lots and lots and lots of trees. Where'd the trees come from? People didn't plant those.
Seed? Wind moving the seeds?
Could be, yeah. But why did they persist?
Because we don't.
You had water.
Because human activity, without even thinking about the hills or whatever, we have unintended consequences, or I guess wouldn't be a big thing to the people out there, but we suppressed fire, for one thing, is probably the biggest reason. We suppress fire. Now, people have said that there may have been just natural climate changes where we might have gotten a few trees up in here, but nothing like the level that it was allowed to happen. But it just shows you the activity of humans. Unintended consequences, there's a direct effect here. Now, when we get trees, what does that mean? We're suppressing the other biome, which is the prairie biome. And so that's one of the threats against prairie somewhat. Okay, plug here. How many of you have been to the Loess Hills Prairie Seminar? Several of you here. It's a 2.5-day program, and it's going to be June 1st through the 3rd, 2018. This will be the 42nd year of it. With evening programs, they have things at Cyruncle State Preserve, which I'll show a picture of in a second. And it's out between Castana and the old village of Kennebec, which is, there's nothing there except a farmstead. It's all ages in natural and cultural history. And last year we had a couple herpetologists come in and did a program. They did the kids program. And it was a mother, she is 89 years old, and her daughter, and they live in different places, but they both brought 3-toed box turtles. And they set them down, you know, because it's herpetology, you know. And one was a male and one was a female, and they decided that it was time, you know, ideas of love. So they mated throughout the whole program while they're sitting there. And it was really pretty amusing, but it was kind of neat too, because you're seeing nature at work.
Oh, God.
Okay, Rex. And there's an overhead view of the Cyruncle Preserve. This is down north of Turin, not far from Grand Center. And if you look on those hills, that's a pretty good representation of what the middle to southern Loess Hills looks like today. And that's Cyruncle, a picture of him there, who was a great guy. This is a picture that was taken at the preserve. This is one of the forays out, a nature hike, where they're looking at either prairie, it could have been prairie, it could have been insects, it could have been any number of things that they're looking at. But there's a group that went off on one of the bluffs. There is a little bit of aerobic activity involved, but you get out in nature and it's really a pretty wonderful thing. Here's a little closer to home, and this is a more recent picture. This is War Eagle Monument. How many of you have been up to War Eagle Monument? And if you walk down there, what's neat about this picture, see, I don't have to tell you people so much, but this picture, what is that picture showing? You got the Big Sioux River coming in to where it joins with the Missouri. And what's that little tongue of land sticking out there? That's the southernmost point of South Dakota. So right there you've got Iowa, South Dakota, Nebraska. I think you want to do something there.
Aren't you plugged in? Is the computer plugged in, Rex?
Well, this may get shorter quicker. That's okay. Why don't we advance a slide while we got it too? Okay. And I just love this picture because now we can actually see something similar to this in Iowa. Now, you don't see them all the time when you're out there, but Bill and Dottie, probably when you go home, you have a chance to see them, don't you? Up at the Broken Kettle Grasslands, there's a 1,900-acre tract that has bison secure fence around it, and they have a herd of, I think it's over 200 head, that free range as much as you can in Iowa. And that's kind of what the image would look like. So it's kind of a return back to some of the megafauna from years ago, and they're pretty interesting animals. Don't get between them and their babies. Another picture here, this is down in the southern Loess Hills, and I put this up, this is in 1952, so that would have been 50 years after the Grand Center one. But you notice there are some trees starting to work their way in there. In 52 there would have been. This is the same site then, more recently, in 2006. So in 50 years, we've had an awful lot of encroachment. What does that mean? Well, it means if we don't pay any attention, things will change. So, go ahead. Agriculture is a pretty important thing in the Loess Hills. And so one of the things we talk about with the Loess Hills Alliance, we have a couple guys that are working as farm bill biologists that try to work within the government programs with producers to do better practices and to try to preserve some of these things. And we're very happy with the work that those guys are doing out there. Because we're not going to get rid of agriculture, nor should we. I mean, that's just one of those things that's out there. But the better we can do to help be aware of things, the better off we'll be. One of those practices is restoring fire as a management tool in the hills. And it's getting now to where, how many of you have seen a prairie fire? See, if we went to an audience in Cedar Falls, we would not have nearly as many hands raised right there. because this is something that's now part of agriculture out here too, in the Loess Hills region. It does take a lot of work, takes a lot of planning. When you strike the match, what happens for a prairie fire? Liability attaches. That's one of the lessons we have. We're going to have a school, I think one's going to be in Sloan and one's going to be down in Glenwood, for farmers with mid-contract burns on CRP and for fire departments to come in so they understand some of the legal things that we need to do. So that's one of the things that I think has changed. That's changed a lot in the past 10 or 15 years too. We've got a lot more fire activity going on, and what it does is it suppresses some of that growth and it helps revitalize some of the prairie. Did it just die?
Yeah.
I think it did. Okay, current threats to the hill, and it's okay because we're at a point now where we can get away from it. Current threats to the hill. What are threats to the hills right now? And when we talk about threats to the hill, I guess you need to define what we're threatening.
Development.
Okay, development's one of the big ones. How do you control development?
Control population.
Control population control, yeah. But what else? Yes?
How are you gonna use the land?
How are you going to use the land? Okay, who determines how you use the land?
I don't know, but it needs to have a determination.
It's a dicey thing. You remember I said that I was the zoning administrator in Sloan? Well, in Sloan, it's not nearly as big a deal, but there is county zoning law. There are county zoning laws. Each county of the 7 counties is different. I heard a guy that was complaining vigorously about the Loess Hills Alliance just the other day, who lives down by Little Sioux, because he owns some land that's on the front part of the hills. And he was upset because he said, if I want to go out there, it's my land, if I want to go out there and mine Loess, for fill, I should be allowed to do that. Harrison County happens to have a 1-mile restriction where you have to get some pretty good permissions to be able to go in and do that as a zoning thing. But every county's zoning ordinances are different. So that's one of the things. So we'll talk about development. That's one thing that we may be able to do something, maybe not. In my heart, I know it's just me and I realize that. As I drive south from Southern Hills Mall when I'm going home, I drive past these Loess Hills areas with the big house sitting up on top of the hill. And I may be irritating somebody here if you live in one of those houses, but I don't care. But they've got like a 10-acre lawn of mowed bluegrass. Okay, from my perspective, and I understand their perspective, we have this European mentality that came from Northern Europe when it was settled here, that we have to control nature. Now, they may not have said it that way, but that's kind of what it comes down. I want to have a uniform lawn. I want to do something contrary to what nature wants, and so I'm willing to put the resources into battle nature. So if I see a little weed growing out here, that's the end of the world, and I've got to go nuke it, Well, we got to realize we have that various levels of that mentality out here. And I recognize it too. I mow my yard. I've got a yard that's, otherwise the neighbors would be all upset. But really, what are we doing sometimes? Do we need to have a 10-acre lawn that we're going to be out there mowing for half a week, periodically? I don't understand it. Oh, it's back. What are other threats to the hills? We got development.
Soil erosion.
Yeah, soil erosion. This is one of the most erodible landforms in the nation. And in fact, even without any human involvement, even if it was just natives, I shouldn't leave natives in here, but they tended to do a better job anyway. There would have been erosion. This is an erodible landscape. When the wind stopped blowing and when it stopped depositing loess, that stuff was there. Nature's going to start pulling it down. And we have had, without any European settlement involvement, we've probably lost 10 to 15 feet of height of the Loess Hills, just in the past 10,000 years. But in the last 100 years, we've lost, in some cases, almost that much too. So erosion we have to deal with, and a threat to the hill of agriculture. Agriculture can also be a boon to the hills, though, too. So what are some problems with agriculture?
Pollution.
Pesticides, pollution, yeah. Does that mean we should get rid of all pesticides? It's probably not a very practical thing to say right now. But
open up the wind again too.
What's that?
You open up the ground to wind.
You open up the ground to wind, yeah. That's right. And wind and rain with that kind of exposure. So that's why I say I'm very proud of the work that these 2 private lands farm bill people are doing with the Loess Hills Alliance, trying to work with landowners to try to make it as reasonable as you can and to do some things that make some sense. Anybody have any comments? Because that's where I am.